Dr. Jessica Wildcat Walker stood before the quantum drive, her scarred hands hovering over the control panel. 20 years of military service had taught her to trust her gut, and right now, her instincts were screaming that something was wrong. The experiment was going too well. Every variable aligned perfectly. Every quantum fluctuation settled into exactly the right pattern. In her experience, perfection usually meant someone was stacking the deck. Numbers looking good. Dr. Walker, her assistant, called from the monitoring station. We're seeing 99.999% efficiency. That's the problem, Walker muttered, her combat-trained eyes scanning the readouts. Back in the SEALs, she'd learned that perfect conditions usually meant an ambush. Reality isn't this neat, Tommy. Universe is more of a bar fight than a ballet. She pulled up the raw data streams, patterns of quantum entanglement flowing across her holographic display. The former SEAL had traded her tactical gear for a lab coat years ago, but she'd never lost that edge. The ability to spot when something wasn't quite right. Her fingers, calloused from both trigger pulls and typing, danced across the interface. Running a diagnostic sweep, she announced, ignoring the groans from her team. They'd been working on this faster-than-light prototype for 3 years. Nobody wanted delays now. Something about these quantum signatures. They're like footprints in snow that's too perfect. No wind, no drift, no imperfections. 40 light-years away, in a dimension humanity hadn't yet discovered, the lords of the cosmos noticed the probe. The eldest lord, a being of pure energy and mathematical precision, felt an emotion it hadn't experienced in 50 millennia. Concern. The primitives are testing the barriers, it communicated to the Confederation Council. They've detected the quantum constants we established to prevent FTL travel. Impossible. Another lord responded, its thought patterns rippling with dismissal. We designed the constants to appear natural. No species has ever. Watch, the eldest lord interrupted, something it hadn't done in 10,000 years. Back in the lab, Walker had isolated a pattern. Look at this, she called her team over. Every quantum fluctuation we're seeing. They're not random. They're designed to look random. She pulled up 2 data sets side by side. Natural quantum foam has imperfections, tiny variations that shouldn't be there according to our current models. But these readings, they're too clean. Like someone wrote an equation for chaos instead of letting it happen naturally. The lords watched in growing alarm as Walker began systematically probing their carefully constructed barriers. For 50,000 years, they'd maintained peace in the galaxy through control. Subtle manipulations of physical constants that made certain technologies impossible. FTL travel had been their masterpiece, an equation so perfect it convinced every species that faster-than-light travel was naturally impossible. Until now. Dr. Walker, Tommy called out, his voice tense. The quantum foam, it's reacting to our probes. That's not supposed to happen, right? Walker's eyes narrowed. 2 decades of special operations had taught her to recognize active countermeasures. No, it's not. And that means... A slow smile spread across her face, the same one she'd worn before high-risk missions. That means we're not discovering the laws of physics. We're breaking them. She straightened up, military bearing returning as adrenaline kicked in. Power up the drive. Full spectrum analysis. If someone built a wall, they must have been trying to keep something out, or in. In their dimension, the lords began emergency protocols for the first time since the galaxy's last war. The eldest lord's message rippled through their collective consciousness. They're not just testing the barriers, they're seeing them. Humanity has discovered they're in a prison, and they're about to break out. As the quantum drive hummed to life, Walker felt that familiar pre-mission tension. She'd fought in enough wars to know the universe was rarely perfect. Now she knew why these readings were. Someone had made them that way. And if there's one thing humans excelled at, it was breaking things that others had made. Let's see what's behind door number 1, she whispered, and initiated the drive sequence. The Thunder Child materialized in the heart of the Confederation's consciousness hub like a brick through stained glass. Alarms that hadn't sounded in millennia screamed across dimensional planes as humanity's first FTL warship crashed through layers of reality never meant to be breached. Status report. Walker barked, maintaining her footing as the ship shuddered. The bridge crew, all ex-military like herself, responded with practiced efficiency despite the cosmic light show blazing through their viewports. "Ma'am, we're everywhere," Lieutenant Chen reported from navigation, his displays showing impossible readings. "And nowhere. And I think we're in someone's living room." He wasn't far off. The Thunder Child had emerged in the equivalent of the Confederation's central nervous system. Swirls of pure energy, the lords themselves, scattered like startled fish as the human vessel's wake rippled through their realm. That, Walker announced with professional understatement, wasn't supposed to happen. She studied the swirling patterns of light surrounding them. "Though I've got to say, as far as accidents go, this is one of our better ones." The eldest lord, recovering from the initial shock, attempted to process this impossibility. The humans hadn't just broken through their barriers. They'd somehow turned the barrier's own energy against itself, using the perfect mathematical constants as a gravitational slingshot. "How?" it demanded, manifesting before the Thunder Child's bridge in a form it believed would command respect, a being of pure geometric precision and light. "This breach violates 17 fundamental laws of physics." Walker, who'd seen enough combat to be unfazed by light shows, merely raised an eyebrow. "Only 17. We must be losing our touch." She turned to her XO. "Commander Taylor, how many regulations did we break getting here?" 23, Mom," Taylor replied crisply. 24 if you count Murphy's Law as a regulation." "Murphy's Law is not a regulation." The Lord's perfect form flickered with distress. "It is not even a proper scientific principle. It is—" It paused, accessing human databases. "It is a humorous observation about the nature of mishaps." "Funny thing about Murphy's Law," Walker said, standing from her captain's chair. "The more you try to prevent something from going wrong, the more spectacularly it tends to blow up in your face. Like, say, creating perfect mathematical constants to prevent FTL travel." Around them, younger lords were gathering, fascinated by the chaos emanating from the human vessel. The ship's quantum wake was introducing random fluctuations into their perfectly ordered realm. More disturbing still, these fluctuations were creating new patterns, more complex than their carefully maintained order. "You will cease this disorder immediately," the eldest lord commanded. "Your presence here disrupts harmonies maintained for 50,000 years." Walker's response was to pull up the ship's sensors. Interesting choice of words there. Maintained implies these harmonies aren't natural. They're engineered. She smiled, the same smile that had preceded numerous successful SEAL operations, and anything engineered can be re-engineered. The younger lords, to the elders' horror, were already studying the quantum wake patterns. Some had begun attempting to replicate the chaotic fluctuations, introducing random variables into their own thought patterns. "This is forbidden," the eldest lord declared. "Order must be maintained." "Here's the thing about order," Walker replied, pulling up readings from their journey. "Perfect order is stagnation. Life, real life, thrives on the edge of chaos. That's where evolution happens. That's where innovation comes from." She gestured to the swirling patterns around them. "And from what my sensors tell me, your perfect society hasn't evolved in 50,000 years." The Thunder Child's quantum drive hummed, each imperfect fluctuation sending ripples through the Confederation's realm. The younger lords watched in fascination as these ripples created new patterns, new possibilities. "So," Walker continued, addressing the assembled lords, "we can either have a civilized discussion about why you felt the need to imprison the entire galaxy in mathematical amber, or," she patted the quantum drive controls, "we can keep accidentally proving Murphy's Law on a cosmic scale. Your choice." The eldest lord, for the first time in 50 millennia, experienced something very close to a headache. The lords of the cosmos had never encountered a species that voluntarily increased entropy. Yet here was Commander Taylor, in the Thunderchild's makeshift mess hall, teaching young lords how to play jazz on a battered trumpet. "You're thinking too much," Taylor advised a frustrated lord whose light form flickered in mathematical precision. "Jazz isn't about hitting the right notes. It's about how you recover when you hit the wrong ones." Walker watched from the doorway, sipping coffee, another concept that horrified the lords. The idea of humans voluntarily ingesting a chaos-inducing chemical for pleasure had sparked a 3-hour debate in their council. "Captain," her comm crackled, "we've got a situation in engineering. The lords are, well, ma'am, you should see this." Engineering was a mess. Chief Engineer Rodriguez stood before a dismantled power coupling, surrounded by lords whose geometric forms had taken on distinctly agitated patterns. The eldest lord hovered nearby, its form practically vibrating with distress. "You deliberately induced a cascade failure," it accused Rodriguez. "You destroyed perfect synchronization." "Yep," Rodriguez replied cheerfully, hands deep in the machinery. "Only way to fix that power fluctuation you've been ignoring for the past 1,000 years. Sometimes you gotta break it to fix it." Walker understood the lord's horror. The power system they'd built was mathematically perfect, each energy pulse synchronized to 16 decimal places. Rodriguez had taken one look at it and declared it wound tighter than a drill surgeon's schedule. The fluctuation was minimal. The eldest lord protested. 0.0000016%. "Yeah," Rodriguez interrupted. "Been building up for a millennium. Give it another century. Would have blown this whole sector to kingdom come. Perfect systems don't handle failure well. No flexibility, see?" Walker watched as Rodriguez demonstrated, using the ship's now imperfect power grid to absorb and adapt to fluctuations that would have shattered the Lord's original design. It was beautiful, in a chaotic way, like a jazz solo played with quantum harmonics. "This is not how power systems should function," the eldest lord insisted. "Tell that to the power system." Rodriguez grinned. "It's working better than it has in 50,000 years. In another part of the ship, Walker found Lieutenant Chen teaching younger lords hand-to-hand combat. The lords, beings of pure energy, had no practical need for physical combat training. Yet they threw themselves into it with surprising enthusiasm. "Fighting teaches balance," Chen explained, demonstrating a kata. "Not just physical balance, mental balance, the art of controlled violence. Violence cannot be controlled." The eldest lord, who had followed Walker, stated, "It is inherently chaotic." Walker watched a young lord attempt a roundhouse kick, its energy form wobbling in a rough approximation of human shape. "That's the point. Chaos can be channeled, directed, like your quantum harmonics, but with more broken noses. Broken noses are inefficient, but memorable," Walker countered. "Every broke nose teaches something. Perfect practice makes perfect mistakes. Imperfect practice teaches adaptation." Later, in what had become an impromptu cultural exchange, Walker found lords studying human art. They were particularly fixated on Jackson Pollock's works, their geometric forms twisting as they tried to comprehend deliberate randomness. "There is no pattern," one lord complained. "No mathematical progression. Yet, it creates emotional resonance." "Welcome to humanity," Walker said, "where we turn chaos into art and violence into dance, where we break things to understand them and introduce disorder to find new kinds of order." The eldest lord, who hadn't left Walker's side all day, finally asked the question that had been disturbing its perfect harmonics. "Why?" Walker thought of Earth's history, of every breakthrough born from conflict, every innovation sparked by competition, every art form that emerged from rebellion against rigid forms. "Because perfection is a cage," she answered. "A perfect system can only do what it's designed to do. An imperfect system can evolve. And evolution, my geometrically perfect friend, is the only game in town worth playing." In the mess hall, Taylor hit a wrong note on his trumpet. The young lord next to him, instead of correcting the error, deliberately hit the same wrong note. Together, they created something new, neither perfect nor wrong, but uniquely alive. The Confederation's rehabilitation chamber was a perfect sphere of white energy, designed to impose absolute harmony on its occupants. Walker stood in its center, arms crossed, watching her crew prepare for what they dubbed Operation Party Crash. The humans will now experience perfect peace, the eldest lord announced. All conflict will be mathematically eliminated. Walker checked her watch. 10 credits says we break your system in under an hour. Gambling is 40 minutes, Rodriguez called from across the chamber. 20, Chen countered, stretching as if preparing for a sparring match. The lords initiated their harmony protocol, waves of pure mathematical order washing over the humans. Walker felt the artificial peace trying to smooth away her rough edges, like spiritual sandpaper against her consciousness. Now, she whispered to her crew, Plan Echo. What happened next would be debated in Confederation councils for centuries. The Thunderchild's crew, instead of resisting the harmony, embraced it, then immediately began organizing the most orderly chaos the lords had ever witnessed. Red team, set up in the north quadrant. Walker commanded. Blue team, south. We're running coalition strike scenarios. The lords watched in bewilderment as the humans divided their perfectly harmonious space into combat zones. But instead of actual fighting, they engaged in elaborate simulations, each team adapting to the other's strategies in real time. This is not peaceful activity, the eldest lord protested. Sure it is, Walker replied, watching Chen's team execute a flawless flanking maneuver. We're not hurting anyone. We're playing. Playing at war is still war. Playing at war prevents real war, Walker corrected. Every scenario we run, every strategy we test, it's all practice for problems we hope we never face. But if we do face them, she let the thought hang as Rodriguez's team demonstrated a creative solution to a simulated breach scenario. The younger lords, who had been watching with increasing interest, began to drift closer. Your harmony chamber's actually perfect for this, Walker continued. Great visualization space. Chen, show them the Thermopylae scenario. The chamber filled with ghostly images of ancient battles as Chen explained the tactical significance. To Walker's amusement, several young lords began taking forms resembling human soldiers, attempting to understand the spatial dynamics of infantry warfare. This is highly irregular, the eldest lord stated, but Walker noticed it watching the simulations with increasing attention. War games teach more than tactics, Walker explained. They teach teamwork, adaptability, resource management. See how blue team just adjusted to red team's surprise maneuver. That's real-time problem solving. Can't calculate that in advance. The harmony protocol flickered as more lords joined the simulations. Some took defensive positions, others attempted offensive maneuvers. The eldest lord's perfect geometric form showed distinct signs of distress. You are corrupting our youth with chaos, it accused. No, Walker corrected, watching a young lord successfully coordinate a complex flanking movement. They're learning that chaos and order aren't opposites. They're tools. Sometimes the most ordered approach is to embrace chaos. Sometimes the best way to prevent violence is to understand it. Hours passed. The Harmony Protocol, designed to impose perfect peace, had instead become the galaxy's most sophisticated war games simulator. Young lords debated strategy with human veterans, each learning from the other's perspective. See that? Walker pointed out to the eldest lord. Your youngest just combined classical Confederation energy manipulation with human small unit tactics. That's innovation. That's evolution. Through conflict, the eldest lord noted disapprovingly. Through controlled conflict, Walker emphasized. Through understanding both chaos and order, rather than trying to eliminate one entirely. The chamber's originally perfect harmony had transformed into something more complex, a dynamic equilibrium of order and chaos, strategy and improvisation, tradition and innovation. 40 minutes, Rodriguez announced smugly. Pay up. Walker grinned, reaching for her credits, but stopped when she noticed several young lords attempting to understand the concept of gambling odds. Some had already started calculating probability matrices for different combat scenarios. Maybe we should teach them poker next, she suggested. The eldest lord's form flickered in what might have been cosmic horror, but Walker noticed it paying particular attention to the innovative tactics its younger members were developing. Sometimes, she reflected, the best way to preserve peace was to master the art of war. And sometimes, the best way to teach was to let others play. The deep space entity appeared without warning, a writhing mass of dark energy that defied the Confederation's perfect equations. It consumed 3 solar systems before the lords even finished their first probability calculation. Impossible, the eldest lord declared, its form flickering with distress. This entity operates outside mathematical law. Walker stood on the Thunderchild's bridge, watching the creatures approach through quantum sensors. That's because it's evolving faster than you can calculate. Rodriguez, show them the Chaos Protocol. The chief engineer pulled up a holographic display that made the lords recoil in mathematical horror. It showed combat patterns that deliberately incorporated random variables, tactical decisions based on incomplete data, and worst of all, intuition. This is madness, the eldest lord protested. One cannot fight chaos with chaos. Watch us, Walker replied, then keyed the ship-wide comm. All hands, battle stations. Chen, ready the quantum torpedoes. Rodriguez, prepare to execute Chaos Protocol Alpha. The Thunderchild's crew moved with practiced precision that somehow incorporated controlled randomness. Each action followed protocols while remaining unpredictable, like a jazz symphony played with quantum weapons. The entity approaches, a younger lord reported, its form taking on a distinctly military bearing, a habit picked up from the war games. Our standard defenses are ineffective. Walker studied the tactical display. That's because you're trying to counter each attack perfectly. Look at its pattern. It's learning from your responses, adapting to your perfection. She turned to Rodriguez. Show them Plan Echo 7. Rodriguez's display shifted, showing an attack pattern that deliberately included weaknesses that were actually traps. Sometimes, he explained to the bewildered lords, the best defense is a good offense. And sometimes, the best defense is letting your enemy think they found your weakness. The entity surged toward them, drawn to what it perceived as vulnerability. Walker waited until the last possible moment. Then, execute Chaos Protocol. The Thunderchild's quantum drive engaged, but instead of firing normally, it created a controlled malfunction. The energy discharge was harmonically imperfect, riddled with randomness that mimicked the entity's own chaos. You're reflecting its own energy signature back at it. A young lord realized, its geometric form showing excitement, but with controlled imperfections that create destructive interference patterns. Got it in one. Walker grinned. Can't fight chaos with order. But chaos versus chaos. That's a game we humans have been playing since we invented warfare. The entity recoiled as its own chaotic energy was turned against it, amplified and distorted by the Thunderchild's controlled disorder. It tried to adapt, but for each pattern it developed, the humans introduced new random variables. Impossible, the eldest lord repeated, but with less conviction. Your tactics violate every principle of strategic doctrine. That's why they work, Walker explained, directing Chen to modify the quantum torpedo yield with deliberately irregular fluctuations. Perfect doctrine is predictable doctrine, and predictable means vulnerable. The entity, faced with an opponent it couldn't predict or adapt to, began to retreat. But Walker wasn't finished. Rodriguez, show them why we call it the Chaos Protocol. The chief engineer initiated a sequence that made even the younger lords pulse with concern. The Thunderchild began generating quantum irregularities that matched the entity's frequency, but carried hidden patterns, order disguised as chaos. We're not just fighting it, Walker explained as the entity fell into their trap. We're teaching it. Each chaotic burst contains encrypted patterns, mathematical beauty hidden in apparent disorder. The entity's movements became erratic, then gradually more structured. It was learning, adapting not to perfect order, but to the balance between chaos and control. You're communicating with it, a young lord asked in astonishment. In its own language, Walker confirmed. Sometimes the best way to stop a fight is to start a conversation, even if that conversation looks like combat to everyone else. The entity, now partially entrained to their hybrid patterns, hung in space like a suspended question. The lords watched in amazement as it began mimicking the Thunder Child's quantum harmonics, chaos, and order blending in new ways. And that, Walker said to the eldest lord, is why sometimes the best defense isn't perfect order or pure chaos. It's knowing when to use each and how to make them dance together. The perfect society of the Confederation began unraveling with a joke. A young lord, freshly returned from war games aboard the Thunder Child, created a quantum fluctuation that served no mathematical purpose. It was, by all calculations, perfectly useless. What humans would call a knock-knock joke. This is highly irregular, the eldest lord declared, watching geometric perfection ripple with suppressed laughter. No, Walker corrected, leaning against a bulkhead in the Thunder Child's observation deck. This is freedom. The revolution spread like wildfire through quantum space. Young lords began experimenting with imperfection, creating art from energy patterns, composing symphonies that deliberately included discords, and worst of all, they started asking what-if questions. What if our perfect society isn't perfect at all? One brave soul asked during a Confederation Council meeting. What if it's just frozen? Walker watched the ensuing chaos from her ship, sipping coffee as reality itself seemed to hiccup around them. Rodriguez had rigged quantum sensors to translate the Lord's communications into visible light. The council chamber looked like a fireworks display in a hurricane. They're not actually rebelling, she explained to her crew. They're waking up. Big difference. The eldest lord appeared on her bridge, its form showing distinct signs of agitation. You have corrupted 50,000 years of perfect harmony. Perfect harmony is just noise that stopped changing, Walker replied, setting down her coffee. Ask any musician. Real harmony needs tension, resolution, movement. Your society hasn't been harmonious. It's been holding one note for 50 millennia. Around them, the revolution took on a distinctly human flavor. Young lords organized debate clubs that turned into art galleries that transformed into scientific think tanks. They began experimenting with controlled imperfection, introducing calculated chaos into their perfect systems. Did you see the latest? Chen asked, showing Walker his tablet. They're using combat algorithms to create abstract art. Something about random targeting protocols creating emergent aesthetic patterns. The artwork in question looked like a quantum explosion had mated with a Kandinsky painting. Walker couldn't tell if she was looking at a masterpiece or a tactical display gone wrong. Perfect, she grinned. The eldest lord, despite its protests, couldn't help but notice the results. Systems that had stagnated for millennia began showing improvement. Young lords, applying principles learned from human warfare to peaceful pursuits, were solving problems that perfect logic had declared unsolvable. Your chaos breeds innovation, it finally admitted, watching a group of lords use modified war game scenarios to model social interactions. Not chaos, Walker corrected. Freedom. The freedom to be wrong, to make mistakes, to learn from them, to be imperfect, and keep trying anyway. The revolution reached its peak when a group of young lords organized what they called a practical improvisation exercise. Using principles learned from human jazz and military strategy, they began modifying the fundamental constants of their realm, not to impose perfect order, but to allow for controlled evolution. Perfect is the enemy of good enough, one declared, quoting Walker's favorite saying. The phrase became a rallying cry, spreading through the Confederation like a quantum virus of enlightenment. The eldest lord found Walker in her ready room, surrounded by reports of the changing Confederation. "We sought to create perfect peace," it said. "Instead, we created perfect stagnation." "Peace isn't the absence of conflict," Walker replied, pulling up footage of young lords engaging in war games that had evolved into a new form of mathematical art. "It's the wisdom to know which conflicts are worth having, and how to have them constructively." Outside the Thunderchild's viewports, the Confederation was transforming. Perfect geometric patterns gained texture, complexity, life. Mathematical constants shifted from rigid barriers to flexible guidelines. The lords were learning to dance with chaos instead of caging it. "Your species," the eldest lord observed, its form showing signs of what might have been amusement, "has a remarkably militant approach to peace." "That's because we learned the hard way," Walker smiled. "Real peace isn't a cage you build to keep war out. It's a garden you have to tend every day, knowing that some conflict helps things grow." Around them, the revolution continued, not with violence, but with jokes, art, and questions that had no perfect answers. And that, Walker reflected, was perfectly imperfect. The deep space entity returned with friends. Thousands of dark energy masses rippled through the Confederation's space, each one adapting and evolving faster than the last. The perfect defenses, even with their recent modifications, began to crack. "All those war games," a young lord mused, its form flickering with what Walker now recognized as grim humor. "And we never planned for this scenario." "That's because planning for every scenario is impossible," Walker replied, standing in the Thunderchild's Combat Information Center. "What matters is learning how to lose the right way." The eldest lord, who had finally started going by the name Prime at Walker's insistence, manifested beside her. "Explain this concept of losing the right way." Walker pulled up the tactical display, showing the encroaching entities. "Rodriguez, show them the Thermopylae simulation." The holographic display shifted, showing the ancient battle where 300 Spartans held off a massive Persian army. "They lost," Walker explained, "but they lost in a way that served a greater strategy. Sometimes you sacrifice a position to gain an advantage." Around them, the Confederation's perfect defenses continued to fail. Each perfect response was countered, each mathematical solution adapted to. The entities had learned from their last encounter. Chaos could no longer be fought with simple, controlled chaos. "We need to teach them to lose," Walker announced to the assembled lords. "Losing is inefficient," Prime argued, but with less conviction than it would have shown weeks ago. "Losing is how we learn," Walker countered. "Every defeat teaches something victory can't." "Rodriguez, demonstrate." The chief engineer initiated a series of apparently random retreats from the entities. Each withdrawal seemed like a failure, but Walker saw the pattern emerging. "We're not just losing," she explained. "We're losing data. Every retreat tells us something new about how they adapt." The younger lords, veterans of countless war games now, caught on quickly. They began implementing controlled failures, each defeat carefully orchestrated to reveal more about their enemy's evolution. "Supreme excellence consists of breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting," quoted one lord, its form shifting into a rough approximation of a human martial artist. "Sun Tzu," Walker grinned. "You've been studying." "The art of war contains many mathematical principles," the lord replied. "Though we're beginning to understand it's more art than mathematics." The entities pressed their advantage, or what they thought was their advantage. Each victory taught them to be more aggressive, more adaptable. They never realized they were being taught. "Now," Walker commanded, "show them what humanity's greatest military commanders learned centuries ago. Sometimes you have to lose the battle to win the war." The Thunderchild's quantum drive engaged, its carefully imperfect harmonics rippling through space. The lords, following Walker's strategy, began their own calculated failures. Each retreat, each apparent defeat, was a brush stroke in a larger picture. "We're not just fighting them," Walker explained to Prime. who watched with growing understanding. We're teaching them how to evolve in a specific direction. Every defeat shapes their adaptation. The entities, drunk on victory, never noticed they were being herded into a quantum resonance trap 50,000 years in the making. The Lord's perfect mathematics, combined with human tactical improvisation, had created something entirely new, a strategy that evolved faster than the enemy could adapt to it. Your species, Prime observed, watching the entities fall into position, has elevated losing into an art form. Had to, Walker replied, checking the tactical display. We spent most of our history losing to something. Nature, each other, our own limitations. We learned to make it work for us. The trap was ready. The entities, evolved exactly as planned through calculated defeats, had developed precisely the vulnerabilities the combined human Lord force needed. Time to show them why humanity's greatest victories often came after our worst defeats, Walker announced. Execute final phase. As the trap closed, Prime's form showed something very close to human satisfaction. Perhaps, it mused, perfection isn't about never losing. Perhaps it's about learning to lose perfectly. No, Walker corrected, watching their carefully orchestrated defeat transform into decisive victory. It's about learning that there's no such thing as perfect. There's just better than yesterday. The quantum classroom shimmered with possibilities as Walker faced her most challenging mission yet, teaching a new generation of human Lord hybrid strategists. The room, like its occupants, existed in a state of controlled chaos. Part military academy, part cosmic meditation chamber. First lesson, Walker announced to her students, some human, some Lord, most somewhere in between. Everything I'm about to teach you is wrong. A ripple of confusion passed through the Lords, while the human cadets grinned, already understanding. Not wrong as in incorrect, she clarified, pacing before them. Wrong as in incomplete. Every strategy, every tactic, every perfect solution. They're all wrong because the universe keeps changing. Your job isn't to find the right answer. It's to keep finding better wrong answers. 5 years had passed since the Entity War. The Thunder Child, now more research vessel than warship, had become a floating academy. Its battle scars told stories of both failure and triumph. Precisely the lesson Walker wanted to teach. Captain Walker, a young Lord form, raised what might have been a hand. The tactical databases show a 97% success rate for the Chaos Protocol. How can that be wrong? Walker smiled. Rodriguez, show them yesterday's test results. The chief engineer, now sporting a few more gray hairs and a permanent quantum resonance from prolonged Lord exposure, pulled up a holographic display. Entity echo patterns. They're already adapting to the Chaos Protocol. Give them another year. It'll be useless. And that, Walker continued, is why we're here. The Confederation spent 50,000 years perfecting a system that nearly got them killed. Humanity spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of imperfection. Time to combine the best of both. Prime manifested in the classroom, its form now permanently altered by human influence, still geometric, but with deliberate asymmetries that it had come to prefer. The human concept of continuous improvement through controlled failure remains counterintuitive, but effective, Walker countered. Show them the numbers. The displays shifted, showing the Confederation's advancement over the past 5 years. More progress had been made in fields from quantum physics to art than in the previous 10 millennia combined. This is why we're creating the Strategic Adaptation Force, Walker explained. Not to fight wars, but to keep peace by staying ahead of them. Every graduate of this academy will be a master of both order and chaos, perfect math, and imperfect reality. A human cadet raised her hand. Is that why we have to take both quantum mechanics and jazz improvisation? Exactly, Walker grinned. You can't appreciate harmony until you understand discord. Can't value peace until you understand conflict. Can't create something new until you're willing to break something old. The classroom shifted, the quantum space reorganizing into a combat simulator. But unlike the war games of 5 years ago, This simulation incorporated both human and Lord elements. Perfect calculation blended with intuitive leaps, mathematical precision dancing with controlled chaos. The entities aren't gone, Walker reminded them. They're evolving, adapting, learning, just like we are. The difference is, they're trying to perfect their chaos. We're learning to surf it. Prime's form flickered with what might have been pride. We sought to create perfect order. Humanity taught us to create perfect balance instead. No such thing as perfect balance, Walker corrected, watching her students begin their exercises. Just better balance than yesterday. That's the real secret humanity brought to the cosmos. Not our warfare, not our chaos, but our endless drive to improve through imperfection. The classroom erupted in controlled chaos as students began their practical exercises. Quantum formulae merged with tactical innovations, each failure teaching something new, each success revealing new challenges. Walker watched them, these children of two civilizations, each carrying the best of both worlds. They would face threats neither humanity nor the Lords could have handled alone. But together, combining mathematical precision with human adaptability, they were creating something entirely new. Perfect harmony, she mused, is just the beginning of the song. The real music comes after, in all the wonderful ways we learn to play it wrong. Above them, through the quantum viewport, new stars were being born. In their light, Walker saw the future. Not a perfect universe, but one constantly learning, growing, and evolving. One beautiful mistake at a time.